It was supposed to be an easy drive, just a few hours on the highway, away from the chaos of the city. The road was long and empty, stretching across flat fields and distant hills. The kind of place where you could forget time and just let the miles roll beneath you. But there was something about the silence that didn't sit right. It was too quiet. The engine sputtered. At first, it was subtle. A little hesitation, as if the car was asking for a second to breathe. I ignored it, figuring it was just a quirk of an old engine. But then it happened again. The engine cut out, and this time I couldn't get it back on. I pulled over to the side of the road and sat there, staring at the stretch of asphalt ahead. I'd been on this highway before many times. It should have been familiar. But today something felt different. I popped the hood, hoping to figure out what was wrong. But I didn't know much about car engines. My phone had no signal, and the sun was starting to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and purple. It was getting late. I tried to start the car again, but it just groaned and refused to turn over. That's when I saw it. The sign on the side of the road. An old wooden post, with peeling paint and letters barely visible in the fading light. It read, Miller's Ridge. I had never seen that sign before. There were no houses nearby, no landmarks, just endless stretches of road on either side. But something in my gut told me I needed to keep going. Maybe there was a house or a shop up ahead where I could call for help. I shut the hood and locked the car, feeling an uneasy sensation in the pit of my stomach. The air felt thick, like it was holding its breath. I started walking, taking slow, deliberate steps, hoping to find some kind of signal or a place to call a tow truck. It wasn't far. After about 10 minutes, I saw a small, dilapidated building in the distance, barely visible through the trees. A roadside diner, maybe? I quickened my pace, eager to get out of the cold and figure out what to do. As I approached, I noticed something odd. The place didn't look like it had been used in years. The windows were dusty and cracked, and the door was hanging slightly ajar, swaying in the breeze like it was waiting for someone to step inside. I hesitated, standing there at the edge of the parking lot. A chill crawled up my spine. I could hear the wind rustling the leaves, but there was no sound of life. No cars, no voices, nothing. I almost turned back, but then I heard it. A soft scraping noise, like footsteps dragging across the ground. I stepped forward, my heart racing. The door creaked open as if inviting me inside. Inside was dark, the only light coming from a flickering bulb near the counter. The air smelled stale, like something had been left to rot. A few empty chairs were scattered around, and the floor was covered in dust. But there was no sign of anyone. It was like the place had been abandoned for years. But then I saw it. In the corner, a photo on the wall. Faded, yellowed, but still recognizable. A man in a dark suit, standing in front of the diner. He looked so out of place in this rundown setting, like he had stepped out of time. His face was solemn, his eyes dark and vacant. Couldn't look away. There was something haunting about the way he stared directly at the camera, something unsettling. It was as if he was waiting for someone. A loud bang echoed through the room. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest. The door slammed shut behind me, and I could hear the scrape of boots on the floor. Slowly, the man in the photo was replaced by another image. One that wasn't there before. A blurred figure, standing in the shadows, watching me. My breath hitched in my throat as I tried to back away. But the figure stepped forward, and I froze. His face was the same as the man in the photo, but there was something wrong about it. His expression twisted, as if in pain or anger. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. And then, in the dim light, I saw it. The scar running down his face, right across his left cheek. The scar that looked so much like the one I had seen earlier that day, in the reflection of my rearview mirror. I stumbled backward, the fear growing as I realized the truth. The man in the photo wasn't just any stranger. It was the same man who had died here, right in front of this very diner. The same man whose ghost had been haunting this stretch of road for decades. And it hit me. I wasn't just on any road. This was his road. The place where his life had ended, where his body had been found, after his car had broken down all those years ago. Car broke down here. A car had broken down exactly where mine had. His death wasn't an accident. He had been stranded, and whatever happened to him, it hadn't ended. I spun around to leave, but the door was locked. I slammed against it, but it wouldn't budge. My pulse raced, my breath quickened. The figure was moving closer now, his footsteps echoing louder in my ears. I couldn't see his face clearly anymore, but I could feel his presence. The air thickened with the weight of something dark. I reached for my phone. No signal. The car. It was all coming back to me. The strange sense of déjà vu, the uneasy feeling that something was wrong. I had walked straight into the same trap. My car had broken down where he had died, and I had been drawn here to the same place by some invisible pull. I could hear him now, whispering through the crack in the door, his voice low and hoarse. "It's your turn," he rasped. "I've been waiting for you." The walls seemed to close in. The shadows stretched long across the floor. I could feel the weight of his gaze, even though I couldn't see him anymore. Something was wrong with this place. Something ancient. Something malevolent. As I stood there, trapped in the diner, it dawned on me. This wasn't just a roadside stop. This was his place. And I was never going to leave. I don't remember how long I stood there. Time had no meaning. But I do remember the sound of the door creaking open again, and the chill that rushed in as I felt something brush against my shoulder. The figure was standing behind me, his breath cold on my neck. And then, darkness. The chill they leave behind lingers, like a whisper in the back of your mind. The local legend. I heard one such story a few years ago during a cross-country drive. It was just a short stop in a small town to refuel, stretch my legs, and maybe grab a cup of coffee. I wasn't looking for anything special, but when you stop somewhere like that, sometimes you can't help but overhear things, especially in places that seem to be frozen in time. It was an older man who told me. He was sitting by himself at the corner of the diner. His eyes narrowed in a way that made you wonder if he had seen things others hadn't. He struck up a conversation, starting with something innocuous, the weather, the kind of talk that doesn't mean much, but it always seems to lead to something else. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked. I told him no, I was just passing through. He nodded, the kind of nod that told me he had heard that answer more times than he cared to count. "You're lucky you're passing through then," he said. "Most folks who come here don't leave the same way they came." I didn't know if he was just trying to be cryptic or if he was hinting at something darker, but I was intrigued. So, I leaned in a little, offering up a polite, "What do you mean?" He smiled, though it wasn't the kind of smile that reassured you. It was more a knowing, almost sad smile. "There's a local legend," he began, "but I wouldn't expect you to have heard of it, not around here. It's not something people like to talk about much." He paused, watching me, gauging my reaction. "It's about the woods outside town. No one goes near them after dark," he continued. "No one talks about it, but they all know. It's the kind of place that makes you feel like something's always watching you, even if you can't see it." His voice dropped lower, almost to a whisper. "They say, in those woods, something follows you. It starts small. You'll hear footsteps behind you, but when you turn around, no one's there. You'll see something moving in the corner of your eye, but when you look, it's gone. It's not just some ghost, not something that wants to harm you. No, it's worse than that. It waits. Watches. I raised an eyebrow, unsure if he was trying to scare me or if he really believed what he was saying. I had heard my fair share of creepy small-town myths, and I figured this was just another one of those. But the way his voice cracked as he spoke, it made me uneasy. I thought it was just a story, he went on, until I heard about a man who came through here about 20 years ago. He was like you, just passing through on his way to the next town. They say he stopped for gas and heard the legend just like you did. Thought it was all nonsense. So, he decided to take a walk in those woods, just to see for himself. He shook his head, a dark chuckle escaping his lips. He never came back. Not that night, not the next day, not even a week later. The police found his car, still running. But no sign of him. Not a footprint. Not a trail. Nothing. People thought maybe he got lost, maybe something happened to him. But they couldn't find a trace. And no one talks about it, not since. People just pretend it didn't happen, because if they say it out loud, it makes it real. I laughed nervously, brushing it off as just another creepy small-town tale. But the old man's eyes never left me, his expression too serious. The silence between us grew thick, and for the first time, I felt the slightest shiver creep down my spine. "Are you saying the legend's real?" I asked, trying to sound dismissive, but it came out quieter than I meant. "What, you think something followed him?" His smile returned, but this time it wasn't comforting. "I know what I know, son, and you don't always have to see something to believe it." I paid my bill, the conversation still swirling in my mind as I headed back to my car. As I left the diner, I noticed the sun had dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the road. The air had a strange chill to it, and for a moment, I thought I heard something behind me. I turned, but there was no one, only the stillness of the night. I shook it off. It was just the old man's story messing with my head. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was just spooked by the atmosphere of the town. Whatever it was, I didn't want to give in to it. I had miles to go before I could rest. I hit the highway, the headlights cutting through the darkness. But the farther I drove, the more I couldn't shake that feeling. Like I wasn't alone. At first, it was just a faint sense that something was out there, lurking in the periphery of my vision. I'd glance at the rearview mirror, but nothing was there. Still, the feeling lingered, gnawing at the back of my mind. Then I started to hear it. The sound of footsteps, just behind me. At first, I thought it was the tires on the road or the hum of the engine. But it wasn't. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I turned on the radio, hoping to drown it out, but the sound only grew louder. Every few seconds, a soft tap, like someone walking just behind my car. I glanced in the side mirror, half expecting to see someone walking in the dark, but there was nothing. No one in sight. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but the more I thought about it, the more the old man's words echoed in my mind. It waits, watches. I reached the next town, and the sensation of being followed finally began to fade. But the unease didn't leave me. When I checked into the small motel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the room. Not in a tangible way, but in the sense that something had come with me. Something had followed me. For the next few days, I kept thinking about the woods. I told myself it was just a story, a warning to keep tourists out. But as the days wore on, I started to wonder, what if that old man wasn't just telling a tale? What if something was following me? The thought stayed with me, nagging at the edges of my mind. I would hear something in the distance late at night. Footsteps, a whisper, an echo. But when I turned to look, nothing was ever there. And yet, somehow, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't left that town behind. I may have crossed several state lines, but I know one thing for sure. Whatever it is, it's still watching. It was around 3 a.m. when Tim's car began to sputter. The engine made a sound, almost like a cough, before it fell silent. The headlights flickered and then dimmed completely, leaving him in complete darkness. The road was empty, the highway stretching out in both directions like an endless black ribbon. Tim wasn't sure where he was anymore. His phone had no service, and the sign he had passed earlier hadn't offered much help. Just a faded green sign with an arrow pointing left toward a small town, miles down the road. The air felt colder than it should have been for an August night. Even with the windows up, Tim could feel a strange, biting chill creeping into the car. He cursed under his breath, reaching for the ignition to try the car again. But it wouldn't turn over. It wasn't like the engine was dead. It just wouldn't start. It was as if something was blocking it from running. He pulled out his flashlight and stepped out of the car, the sudden change in temperature making his breath visible in the night air. His shoes crunched against the gravel as he walked around to the hood, hoping to find something obvious, a loose wire, maybe. But the engine looked fine. Everything appeared normal except for one thing, the faint sound of rustling, like the wind was picking up, but there was no wind. Not a single leaf moved. Tim stood there for a moment, listening. He turned toward the overpass above him. The highway curved beneath it, the elevated concrete structure looming overhead like a silent, imposing giant. He wondered if there was some kind of emergency call box nearby. If he could just walk up to the overpass, maybe he could get a signal. As he looked up, the shadow beneath the overpass seemed to stretch longer, darker, as though the night itself was thickening. He couldn't help but feel a strange pull, an unsettling pressure, like the place was waiting for something, or someone. Probably just nerves, Tim muttered to himself. But there was something about the overpass that didn't sit right. The road under it was quiet, eerily so. It was as if the entire world had fallen silent. He considered walking up to the overpass. He didn't want to be stranded out here in the dark any longer than necessary. But the idea of walking underneath that shadow made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He shook the feeling off and decided to head toward the overpass. As he walked, the sound of his steps felt too loud against the stillness, almost too deliberate. He passed a few old road signs, rusting and barely visible, before he reached the foot of the overpass. He hesitated for a moment, his gaze drawn to the space beneath the bridge. It wasn't just the inky darkness. It was something deeper. The shadows were alive, almost pulsating. And then he saw it. At first it was a blur, a shape moving in the dark. But then it sharpened into focus and he froze. A figure. It was just standing there, beneath the overpass, perfectly still. Tim couldn't make out any details at first, just the vague outline of a person. But the longer he stared, the more wrong it felt. The figure was too tall, too long, stretching unnaturally. And the more he looked, the more he noticed something else. It was shifting. The shape wasn't entirely human, or at least it didn't look like any human Tim had ever seen. It twisted in ways that defied logic, almost like it was changing shape. Tim's heart hammered in his chest. His breath came out in short, shallow bursts. He felt a deep urge to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He was rooted to the spot, locked in place by a primal fear that he couldn't explain. That was when the figure's head snapped toward him. No movement, no gradual turn, just a sharp, immediate shift, like something that wasn't supposed to move in such a way. And then it spoke. The voice was faint, but it was there, low and gravelly, almost a whisper in the wind. Leave. The word reverberated through the air, its meaning sinking into Tim's bones. He didn't even need to think about it. He turned and ran. His heart pounded in his ears as his feet pounded the gravel, but no matter how fast he ran, he couldn't escape the feeling that it was following him. The chill, the oppressive presence. the suffocating darkness that seemed to close in with every step. His car wasn't far off, but it felt like an eternity before he reached it. As he got closer, he realized it wasn't just that he felt watched. It was more than that. It was as if the ground itself was alive, shifting beneath his feet, urging him to turn around. The shadows under the overpass seemed to reach out, stretching their long, twisted fingers toward him, hungry. Tim didn't stop. He jumped into the car, slamming the door behind him. His hands shook as he fumbled for the keys, but when he tried to turn the ignition, there was nothing, just the same sputter. Panic began to claw at his chest. It wasn't possible. Not again. Not now. He glanced back toward the overpass, and that was when he saw it. The figure was no longer standing still. It was moving toward him, slowly at first, but with each step, it grew faster, its limbs stretching, pulling apart as it crossed the road. It seemed to blur and then reform, its shape never quite holding steady. It wasn't a person anymore, not at all. It was something wrong. Tim's hands went numb as he tried again to start the car, but it wouldn't budge. His pulse quickened. The figure grew closer, closer than he could stand. He didn't even have time to scream before it was upon him. And then the world went dark. When Tim's car was found the next morning, it was sitting beneath the overpass. The engine was still running. The doors were locked, but there was no sign of Tim. Not a single trace. Some say they still hear the whispering under the overpass at night. And some say if you listen closely enough, you can hear the sound of footsteps following in the dark. What lurked beneath the overpass wasn't just a person. It was something much older, much hungrier. Something that's been waiting for someone like Tim to wander too close. Something that never leaves. And if you're unlucky enough to be near that stretch of highway, you may just find that you're the next one to cross its path. It had been a long, exhausting drive. The kind that leaves you barely able to keep your eyes open. I had been traveling for hours, with the road stretching endlessly before me. The only thing that kept me going was the thought of a warm bed and a quiet night in a secluded place. I had planned to stop in a small town just off the main highway, a place where I could rest before heading to my final destination. What I didn't expect, though, was to end up in a house that wasn't meant for me. I found it by accident, or maybe it found me. As I was driving through the desolate stretch of road, the small town flickered on the GPS. No flashy signs or brightly lit streets, just the faint outline of a sleepy village. There was a sign for a bed and breakfast just outside of town. It wasn't the most inviting place, but at that point I didn't care. I needed a place to sleep. I pulled into the long, winding driveway of a house that looked as though it had been stuck in time. The house was old, with peeling paint and creaking shutters. It seemed abandoned at first, but then I saw the porch light flicker on, casting long, eerie shadows across the front yard. A figure appeared at the door, a woman in a long dress, her face partially obscured by the dim light. She waved at me, almost as if she had been expecting me. I parked my car and made my way up the steps. The woman greeted me with a soft smile, but her eyes seemed distant, unfocused, like she was seeing something just beyond me. "You must be the guest," she said, her voice low and almost hypnotic. There was something unsettling about it, but I chalked it up to tiredness. I had been on the road too long. The inside of the house was dark, the air thick with the smell of old wood and dust. It was far from what I expected, a far cry from the usual cozy, welcoming atmosphere I had hoped for. The furniture was antique, old-fashioned, and covered in layers of dust. Yet, there was a strange, almost oppressive stillness in the air, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The woman led me to a small guest room at the end of the hall. It was simple, nothing special, but I didn't care. I was too tired to be picky. She offered me a glass of water before leaving me alone, her footsteps echoing down the long corridor. The door clicked shut behind her, and I was left in silence. I took a moment to sit on the edge of the bed, my mind drifting in and out of focus. The exhaustion weighed heavily on me, but the house, there was something strange about it. I couldn't put my finger on it. It was too quiet, too still. The silence felt unnatural, like the walls themselves were pressing in on me. The clock on the nightstand ticked loudly, the only sound in the room. Each tick seemed to echo in the empty space. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, but it clung to me like a shadow. I pulled the covers up around me, trying to block out the noise of my own racing thoughts. But just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard something, a soft whisper, just beyond the door. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like a voice carried on the wind. I held my breath, straining to listen, but there was nothing more. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just the wind. Maybe. The house creaked and groaned as old houses do. I closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep. But then the whisper came again, closer this time. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. It wasn't the wind. Someone was outside the door. The whispering continued, low and insistent. It was almost as if the voice was speaking directly to me, but the words were too muffled to understand. I got up slowly, my body moving on instinct. I crept toward the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. I paused, listening. The house was so still now, eerily quiet. The whispering had stopped. I opened the door, just a crack, and peeked out into the dimly lit hallway. The air was thick with a strange, cold chill. The house felt wrong. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I could feel something watching from the shadows. I stepped out into the hallway, my footsteps muffled on the carpeted floor. The faint sound of a creaking floorboard echoed from somewhere deeper in the house. My pulse quickened, and I instinctively looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing behind me. But there was no one. I walked down the hallway, drawn by an invisible force. The house seemed to stretch on forever, the dark corners growing deeper and more foreboding the farther I went. The silence was suffocating. Then, at the end of the hall, I saw a door slightly ajar, the faintest sliver of light spilling through the crack. I hadn't noticed it before. Something inside me told me to stay away, to turn back, but my feet moved on their own. I walked toward the door, the whispering growing louder in my ears. When I reached the door, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the doorknob, my breath shallow. The light beyond the door was soft, almost inviting. But the closer I got, the more I felt the weight of something lurking just behind the door. Something that didn't want me to open it. I turned the knob, slowly, carefully, and pushed the door open. The room was empty, but something was off. The air was thick, suffocating, and the walls seemed to pulse, like they were alive. The floor was covered in dust, but there were fresh footprints, just barely visible in the dim light. The room was untouched, yet I felt an overwhelming sense of presence. I stepped inside, my heart racing. The door slammed shut behind me with a force that sent a chill down my spine. I turned around quickly, but there was no one. The house was silent once again, but the weight of something unspoken hung in the air. I turned back toward the center of the room, and that's when I saw it. A large, full-length mirror stood against the wall, its surface cloudy with age. I hadn't noticed it before. As I walked closer, my reflection stared back at me, but there was something wrong. My image didn't move in sync with my movements. It was delayed. And then, for a brief moment, it smiled at me. A wide, unnerving smile that wasn't mine. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. But before I could react, the light flickered once, then went out. The house was silent once again. I never saw the woman again. When I left the room, I found the hallway completely different. The house wasn't the same as when I entered it. The rooms had shifted, the walls had changed, and the door to the outside, where my car was parked, was no longer there. I tried to escape, but every door I opened led to another hallway, another room, another impossible dead end. I was trapped, and I had no idea who or what was keeping me there. It was late, later than I had planned, but after a long drive through winding, desolate roads, I found myself in need of somewhere to rest. My destination had been a small town, if you could call it that, barely a dot on the map. I'd been driving for hours without seeing a single soul, and I was tired. The air had grown thick with an unsettling quiet, the kind that settles in when you realize you're no longer near civilization. When the neon sign flickered on the horizon, I knew this was my only choice. A worn-down, faded motel stood alone against the dark sky. The lights from the sign bounced off the cracked pavement like the last flickers of hope, offering no warmth, but no real choice either. I pulled into the lot. The building was old, its once white walls now stained with the passage of time. There was no one in sight, not a single car parked in the lot. My headlights swept across the space, revealing nothing but empty rooms behind dusty windows. The whole place felt wrong, like it had been abandoned for years but was still holding on for some unknown reason. I parked and stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath my boots as I walked toward the office. The door was cracked open, and I hesitated for a moment. The stillness of the night was almost suffocating, but I was too tired to care. I had to sleep. Inside, the dim light from a single bulb overhead cast long shadows against the walls. Behind the counter, a man stood motionless. His face was pale, almost sickly, and his expression was strange, blank, yet somehow intense. He didn't move when I walked in, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. It was as though I was invisible. "Hi," I said cautiously, trying to break the strange silence. "I need a room for the night." His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a sudden chill rush through me. His pupils were unnaturally wide, the irises barely visible in the dim light. There was something about him that wasn't quite right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. It was almost as if he was waiting. No response. I'll take a room, please," I stammered, uncomfortable with the heavy silence. Finally, he moved slowly, deliberately. He reached down beneath the counter, pulled out a key, and placed it on the desk. His hand lingered there for a moment, fingers still gripping the key, before he slid it toward me. The motion was unnerving, almost deliberate. "Room 4, he muttered in a flat, emotionless voice, barely audible. I took the key, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something wasn't right about this place, about him. But I needed to rest, so I grabbed my things and headed toward the hallway. As I passed by the front desk again, I noticed something strange. The man was still staring at me. His eyes were wide open, locked onto mine with an unsettling intensity. I glanced back, feeling a strange pressure in the air, but he hadn't moved. Not a single twitch. I quickly turned and walked away, my footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The walls of the motel seemed to close in on me as I walked toward room 4. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, and the silence was oppressive. The door to room 4 creaked open with a groan. Inside, the room was dimly lit, with faded wallpaper peeling from the walls. The bed was a small, lumpy thing, its sheets crumpled and stained with age. It was nothing like the rooms I'd stayed in before, but it would do. I set my bag on the bed and went to the bathroom to freshen up. The mirror above the sink was cracked, the reflection warping as I stared at myself. It was strange, but I felt like I wasn't alone in the room anymore. It was as though the very air had shifted, thickened, as if someone or something else was present. I washed my face quickly, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease. I hadn't seen a single other person since I'd arrived, and the silence was unbearable. When I returned to the main room, I tried to push the feeling away. I had to sleep. I closed the blinds, turned off the lights, and climbed into bed. But I couldn't sleep. Not with the silence. Not with the feeling that something was wrong. The sound of footsteps echoed from somewhere down the hall, slow and deliberate. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I lay there listening, my heart pounding. It was just a trick of my mind, I told myself. The wind, the old building settling. But the footsteps continued. Closer, closer. I got up, my legs shaking beneath me, and crept toward the door. Through the small gap in the blinds, I saw movement in the parking lot. A figure standing by my car. It was too dark to see clearly, but I could make out the shape of someone standing motionless, their back to me. I hesitated, then opened the door. The air outside was cold and still. There was no one there, no sign of anyone, just the emptiness of the parking lot stretching out before me. But then, as I turned to head back inside, I saw him, the man from the front desk, standing at the end of the hallway, facing me. His eyes were still wide open, his expression still vacant. He didn't blink. He was just standing there, staring. I didn't move. My heart was pounding in my chest, but my feet felt frozen to the floor. He didn't move, didn't even acknowledge my presence. He just stood there, his gaze never leaving mine. Suddenly, I felt a sharp chill, like someone had turned the temperature down in the room. The air was cold and thick with dread, as though something had shifted. And then, just as quickly as he appeared, he was gone. I rushed back into my room and locked the door, my mind racing. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, just a trick of the mind. But the silence in the motel felt oppressive now, like it was closing in on me, waiting for something. I laid back down on the bed, my eyes glued to the door. The minutes ticked by, and that's when I noticed something else. The man at the front desk was still there, standing perfectly still. In my mind, I could see him, his eyes never blinking, his expression frozen in place. Watching, waiting. The longer I stayed, the more it became clear. It wasn't the motel that was haunted. It was the staff. They never blinked. They never moved. And I don't think they ever left.